Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Grant Berger coming to you from my quarantine basement workshop. I've got a few simple tools here and a lot of time on my hands, and I thought today would be a good day to share with you my technique for tuning up a card scraper. Now, anyone who's used a card scraper knows it's a very simple tool. It's a piece of spring steel that could be cut from an old saw blade or purchased new from a woodworking supplier. But no matter how you cut it, you still have to tune up and prepare your card scraper before you can actually make nice shavings on wood. I'm going to show you my way of doing that today. There's a lot of different ways to skin the cat, so take from it what you will, but here we go. So starting things off, I'd like to share with you the tools that I'm going to use to do this tuning. Like I said, it's a pretty simple toolkit. You might have to invest a little bit of money to have dedicated tools just for tuning up your scrapers, but I promise you, if you take the time and you invest the money and you have a really nicely functioning card scraper, you'll thank yourself. The tools that you're going to need to tune up your card scraper, starting off, we're going to need something to hold the card scraper in place. Now for me, that's this little metalworking vise that I've had for a while. I just use this for card scrapers. It's a good tool to have around. You can also do the same thing using a hand screw, and I will show you a little bit later how you can use a hand screw. It makes it very easy. Next thing you're going to need is a burnisher. Now a burnisher here is just a very hard piece of steel. I've been known to use the round part of a chisel or the back of a turning tool in times of need, but it's a pretty cheap tool. I think it's worth buying. You're going to need some sort of a mill file. Now this is a metalworking file, very basic. I believe this is a Nicholson. It's not a whole lot to buy one of these. It's worth picking up. I've got a DMT Dia-Hone. This is the red, smooth DMT Dia-Hone. I love these things. I swear by them. I use them for everything. I use them for my draw knives, for my turning tools, and also for tuning up my card scrapers. Here we've got a little nifty block of wood with some material relieved from one side here and a saw kerf going halfway through, just enough to pop through that relief. This is a very important tool for the way we're doing this. And I think it's pretty easy to make and pretty worthwhile to have around. Next, we're going to need some sort of sharpening stone. Here I've got 2 DMT plates. These are diamond plates. It's what I normally use. But just to show you, you can also use an oil stone or a water stone if you choose. And lastly, you're going to need card scrapers. I'm going to be showing this today on just a regular rectangular card scraper, but we have a couple of flat edge scrapers. This technique also works very well on curved or roundish card scrapers. Okay, so before we get started on the actual tuning up of the scrapers, I think it's important to have a general understanding of what it is we're going to do to make the scraper perform. Now, I did this little drawing to kind of explain things, and I'm going to start here on the left and show you that for all intents and purposes, we're going to say this is a rough card scraper. Came just out of the package, or you just cut it off of an old saw, and I tried to draw here to show that it's going to have a rough top. So we'll just say that the whole edge that you would use to scrape here, let's just say it's covered in pits and it's not perfectly flat or smooth. Now that's not good. So the first thing we're going to do is address that roughness that we would have on a new scraper. The second stage is going to be having the scraper having flat edge, smooth, and relatively square here on the corner. So we're going to take the scraper from being rough to flat, square, smooth. And then the last stage is going to be using a little burnisher and putting a burnished, what we call a hook, on the edge. And I drew that here just to show we're going to put a little hook. And that's an exaggerated drawing, I know, but just to illustrate and give you the idea here. Starting things off, we're going to take a look at my card scraper, and I'm going to be tuning up just a regular flat square card scraper. This is the most common scraper you'll see. Often you'll buy a scraper like this and using a grinder, make your own shape and profile on it. But this is the most common, and this is what we're going to talk about today. Now, a little tidbit before we get started, you can see that on my card scrapers, I use an engraving tool, and I like to label each edge. So I have A, B, and as we flip it over, C and D. Now I like to do that because I like to keep an eye on which edge I'm using at what time, so that as one edge gets worn down, or maybe I put a really big hook on one edge, I know that maybe that one's worn out and I can flip it and use the other edge, and then when it comes time, I just tune them all up at the same time. So step one in really tuning up this card scraper and getting it ready to cut is I'm going to address the roughness issue on the flat surface of the scraper. And the way I'm going to do that is just polishing it up on a sharpening stone. You can see here I've got a DMT diamond plate. You could also use a water stone or an oil stone. And to save a little bit of time, I'm only going to be polishing about a 1/2 inch up on any of the edges here. No need to do the whole surface. The only part that you're really worried about is the area that's going to be addressed when you're tuning up and scraping. So you can see here, I've got the scraper pretty well smoothed out. I wouldn't call it a high polish or a mirror shine, but honestly, that's not really what we're looking for. We just want to have it nice and kind of smoothed out. Now that we've addressed the flat surface here and gotten this really nice and smooth and kind of polished, the next step is addressing the important part. This is the edge that we're really going to take our time on. And the way we're going to do that first is by dressing it with a mill file. And a lot of people have got the skill and the talent to do this just holding the mill file flat and passing it across the card scraper. I'm personally not that good at doing that. And the way that I'm going to fix that and help myself is using this little block of wood. Now this is just a scrap piece of wood, a little piece of maple with a bandsaw kerf going partway through, and the bandsaw kerf, it's pretty well square with the wood, and I've got some wood relieved out here on the side. And the way that this is going to work, and what you want to keep an eye out for whenever you make this block, is you want that bandsaw kerf to fit pretty snug over your card scraper. Okay, it's very important. You don't want this to be jiggling around on your scraper, or you're going to end up with a less than perfect product. So if you're doing this step by step, go get a scrap of wood. You can relieve a little material here, put it up on its end here, and go to the bandsaw and cut a little square kerf. Easy. Next step that we're going to need to do here is figure out a way to hold the card scraper firmly upright like this so that we can take care of this edge. Now, I think I said at the beginning, I have this nice little metal vise. This is the only thing I use this vise for, is for tuning up card scrapers. Before I had this little vise, I actually just used a hand screw, and I would clamp this in my bench vise, and I would pinch the card scraper here in the end of the hand screw. And that worked just fine. Someone gave me this vise, and now that's what I use it for. But the next step is going to be firmly putting our card scraper into either a vise or a hand screw. I'm going to get my little nifty block of wood here, slip it over top of the card scraper, and I'm going to let my mill file rest inside of that relieved portion of the scraper. Now it's important when I do this that I am skewing my mill file. I don't want it to necessarily be going straight across. If I skew it, I get a little bit more bearing surface over the scraper. And I want to make sure the direction that I skew the mill file is going across the striations of the file. I don't want to be going with the striations of the file like so, because then the scraper will just ride inside of those grooves. So I want it to be skewed thusly. So now, using the smooth side of the file, I'm going to rest it in my block. I'm going to slip the kerf over the card scraper, and I'm going to just gently pass the file over the edge of the scraper. I don't need to push very hard, letting the file do its job. You can hear it when it's making its cut. That's the sound of the file smoothing off that edge. Doesn't take much. You can already see that it's creating a pretty smooth surface. Now it's not exactly perfect, but we're going to take care of that in a minute with the diamond plate. But this is what I'm looking for, a nice square edge, and I kind of like to hear it. Hear that? Now this is probably ready to scrape right now, but it's not going to be peak performance, so we're going to keep going. All right, now the next step is going to be doing basically the same thing that we did with the mill file. However, I'm using my red DMT Dia-Hone, and I call this the diamond toothbrush. I love these things. I couldn't praise them enough. And I'm going to basically just rest this, making sure that the grit side is spanning across the kerf. I'm going to rest this right there in the relief, just like I did the mill file, and I'm going to pass this back and forth. However, I'm not going to push hard. I'm going to be looking for light passes, and I'm going to go kind of fast. And I want to warn you, right here is a time that I've cut myself many times. So you're going to be passing back and forth over the scraper pretty rapidly, and it's really easy to slip off the end here and catch yourself on the edge of this. This is going to get pretty sharp. It's going to look just like this. Making sure I get each end a little bit. Oh, almost got me. And that's sharp. That's real sharp. Now we can see at this point, I know it's tough to focus in here, but the edge is pretty smooth. And again, I always like hearing this little, I don't know if that actually means anything, I just like doing that. So now at this point, I've made the edge here pretty smooth and pretty flat and square, but what I've also done in the process is I've lifted a little burr here on the edge. I can feel it with my finger. You'll feel it too if you do this. And I need to take care of that. I need the edge to be square, very square, meaning no burr sticking up here on any edge. And I need that to be square before I can use the burnisher and put a hook on it, okay? A little bit more control and a little bit of a smoother hook if we do that. So the next step is gonna be popping this out of the vise. And I'm gonna take this back to my finest sharpening stone, the same one we used to smooth this out earlier. I'm going to take it to my finest sharpening stone, and I'm going to just flatten that burr that lifted up off. Not a whole lot of work, just going to flatten it off a little bit. And now, just because I'm a little bit extra and I want to be really sure that this is as smooth and pitless as it can be, I'm going to go through the process one more time of running my diamond plate and then taking it to the stone and knocking the burr off again. So we're on to the final step, burnishing. This is a very basic burnisher. I don't have a handle on it. I know there are a lot of different types of burnishers you can buy. Some have a handle, kind of like a screwdriver. Some have a handle on both sides. Some actually look like that wooden block and they have a variable angle on them. And there's a lot to talk about when it comes to how far to tilt your burnisher when you are putting the hook on. Personally, I like a little bit of a heavier hook. I don't go crazy, but I like a heavier hook. It feels better in my hands. But before I do the burnishing, I'm gonna just drop my card scraper down a little bit in the vise. Just feels a little safer. And the angle that I'm gonna go for when I burnish this, I'm gonna pick one side or the other. Now, honestly, I always burnish both sides of the scraper. That way, when one hook gets worn out, I can just flip the scraper around. I'm going to pretend that I'm trying to make the burnisher square onto the card scraper. But I'm also gonna understand in my heart that I'm human, I'm not a machine, and that's impossible. And I will allow that margin of error to go to one side. So I'm pretending I can keep it square. Oh, it's not gonna happen. I'll just let it list to one side a bit. And all I'm doing is starting on one edge here. I'm going off the end and I'm gonna come back. You'll notice as I'm doing this, I kind of like to keep my fingers touching the vise. That's because this is another really fantastic opportunity to slice your hand open. If you aren't keeping yourself anchored and you shoot off the end of the scraper, you can really cut yourself badly. I've done it. So again, I'm coming to one side just a bit, and I come back. Now I'm going to do the other side. And now I should be able to feel the hook. And it's okay if it's not perfect now. We're gonna take it to a piece of wood, see how it performs. If it needs a little bit of a variation, we'll take care of that. All right, I've got the scraper right out of the vise. Got some decent curly shavings coming here. And if I'm not happy with the one side, since I burnished both sides, I can always flip it around, give it a swing. All right, so the last tip that I'm going to show when it comes to this card scraper is how to reset the burr or the hook once it's kind of gotten worn out. So let's say you're scraping, and eventually you start to roll your hook back down and you're not getting as good of an effect due to it just getting worn out a little bit. It's important to know you don't actually have to go through this whole process over again. You could if you wanted to, or if it's been a long enough time since you've done it the first time. But all you really have to do to reset the hook here is just lay your card scraper on a flat surface, get your burnisher, and I'm laying the burnisher flat on the card scraper, and I'm passing the burnisher across the card scraper, and I'm rolling the hook back down. So I've taken the hook from being shaped like this, and I've rolled it back down, And then once you get comfortable enough, now I can just hold it in my hand and hold my burnisher, and I can just roll it back, resetting the angle of the hook. Doing it in your hand takes a little bit of practice, but when you've been doing it long enough, you can pretty quickly roll the hook down and then reset it with your burnisher. Now, if you've done it properly, you should be able to get some very fine shavings, and you should be able to leave yourself with a very nice finished surface on the wood. Now, this is a really great technique when you're working with curly wood or any sort of intersecting grains, or honestly, if you just don't want to pull out the hand plane, you can go to the card scraper.